Stop the world!
Welcome to Stop the World. I'm David Rowe.
And I'm Justin Bassey, filling in for Olivia Nelson.
Who is outrageously on holidays in Tasmania.
The nerve, Dave, the nerve.
I know.
But look, speaking of people travelling, you were in Delhi last week for the India AI Impact Summit. Why don't you give us a 60-second burst on that?
Sure. So a couple of things. One is there's a big gap between the way people are talking about AI, especially the people at the frontiers, and the way that we're all responding to the progress that AI is making. So Sam Altman, for instance, the CEO of OpenAI, gave a speech saying that superintelligence could be with us within 2 years and that it would be better at his job as CEO of OpenAI than he would be. Now, if an AI system can do Sam Altman's job, I am not an economist, but my submission would be that some of the basic rules of economics that have applied since Adam Smith's days are looking a little bit wobbly. So, I mean, that's my real kind of sense of gravity about the issue. Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, talked about democratization of AI and about AI as a global common good, but this wasn't substantially taken up by others who were there. And it wasn't really clear what democratization meant either in a practical sense. Now, and that's all despite the fact that leaders and policymakers from around the world are agreeing, at least in abstract terms, that AI is going to be transformative. So, and yet we're not quite seeing the sort of policy action come through. The second thing is just the scale of the energy and enthusiasm that I saw in India about artificial intelligence. The summit was open to pretty much everyone who applied for a ticket. I saw reports that 300,000 people were actually had a ticket to attend. Many of those, from my experience, were Indian students and young professionals. Many of them seemed to have a startup idea or had even had a startup, and they were full of ideas, and they were hungry. They wanted to learn something and make some connections, and they were all there. So it was just pretty striking how much talent and potential talent there is in a country like India, and it's something that a country like Australia really needs to think about.
Well, look, even if there were 300,000 people through the gates throughout the week, I still think you were pretty special to have been able to be there,
That's very
Dave.
kind. That's fine. It felt like 300,000.
But really, in terms of global leaders of countries, Macron, Modi, of course, to leaders of the big tech companies, to civil society like yourself, it does seem like a very important summit. I encourage everybody to, if they want to read a little bit more on it, Dave, you wrote what was an excellent opinion piece in both the Australian Financial Review and ASPI's Strategist. So I encourage people to read that. And today, in terms of what we have to look forward to, what the viewers have to look forward to is two segments on this theme. First up, you interview Dr. Andrew Charlton, who's the Australian Assistant Minister for Science, Technology and the Digital Economy, who was also in Delhi. So you talked to him about some of the themes that emerged at the AI Summit. But as I understand it, Dr. Charlton also expands on a speech he gave just this morning, so very current, on building the Australian AI stack. And which, Dave, you thought was actually a pretty good speech.
I thought it was excellent. I mean, you don't always say this about ministerial speeches, but he tackled the complexity of the issue very directly and thoughtfully, and he just very clearly lays out what the issues are and how we need to approach them. So I found it really helpful, and I encourage our viewers to go and check it out. So we've got that short segment with the Assistant Minister, and that's followed by an interview with Maxwell Scott, an American AI expert. He's co-founder and CTO of Strat Alliance Global, which helps companies and organizations integrate AI safely and lawfully. He's a former US diplomat and has led teams at Microsoft's Office of Responsible AI, among other roles and hats.
It is actually a very, very good interview, that one, Dave. It was recorded a few weeks ago, so before Delhi, and obviously there have been some recent developments. There seem to be developments each day, but it covers all the major topics, including whether AI will enhance us, will replace us, or potentially do both. I enjoyed his comparison to the early days of social media. And David, as you know, I do quite enjoy a comparison or two. And I think he actually is spot on in that social media was treated largely as an experiment, not even really taken seriously at first. And then it got ahead of us, and we have not really been able to control it. Here, we really can't afford to treat AI as an experiment and say, let the cards fall where they may, right?
Yeah, I mean, no argument from me on that. There's a growing view in AI circles that we're not ready for the change that's coming and that we've got a lot of policy work to do. And you're starting to see more negative sentiments in polls and even some community backlashes, some open, some protests and this kind of thing. For instance, in the United States around data centers, people are worried about their kids and what it means for them in the future, their job prospects, what it means for their education and so forth. So I think that's a sign for governments everywhere that people need some reassurance and some confidence if we're going to turn what should be a spectacular win for humanity, really, into something that actually makes people's lives better. We can do it, but we've got some work to do to make it happen. So we'll keep these discussions happening here on Stop the World, here on the podcast. But for now, here's Andrew Charlton, followed by Max Scott. So you gave a speech this morning about the ways Australia can build parts of the global AI stack rather than just adopting AI into the rest of our economy. You pointed to the top of the stack, i.e. apps, software, services, and so forth as one key element of Australian ownership. You said the Australian government is exercising, quote, the levers of power to make sure we're builders as well as adopters, things like the National Reconstruction Fund, R&D tax incentives, investments in science, etc. It's a very competitive space. You were in Delhi last week. I know there were thousands, tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of young Indians there, all with their own startup ideas, all with a lot of energy and entrepreneurialism. What did you take away from Delhi in that respect? And are those levers of government that you're talking about going to be enough for Australia?
Well, you're right. In Delhi, we saw evidence of the Precambrian explosion of AI activity and startups in India and around the world. And the point I made in the speech this morning is we want to see Australian AI. We think it is important for Australia's prosperity and for our security that in this wave of technology, we are makers as well as takers. And that means having businesses across the stack that are Australian-owned, Australian-operated. And, in the last wave of technological change, particularly the software industry, we saw a lot of global firms come into Australia, and they delivered, benefits of adoption, benefits of productivity, but we do lose some of the value. By contrast, we've had some positive Australian firms, Canva, Atlassian, many others. And in the age of AI, we want to make sure that we are heavy on Australian firms competing and producing products and services in this space.
One thing I liked about your speech, and I did think it was a very good speech, I've got to say, it was the level of ambition of it. I guess to my point, are the levers that you're talking about going to be enough, or is there also a message, I guess, to Australia as a nation that we need to lift our level of ambition overall?
Well, the government has a whole of government strategy across that stack, and I think that is an ambitious program. I mean, let me just talk you through some of the elements here. I mean, let's remember that government is working in each layer of this stack. The first layer of the stack, and in some ways a really important layer of the stack, is energy. Fundamentally, artificial intelligence turns electrons into intelligence. And the first piece of this stack is making sure that we are producing the electrons. And what the Albanese Labor government has done is making sure that we are adding significant new generation capacity. In the last 10 years under the Liberals, we added negligible new generation capacity. But we have to remember, this is one of our greatest strengths. This is a massive competitive advantage. The cost of energy in Australia can be much lower than the cost of energy in some of our competing countries in this space. We have the world's most radiation intensive nation. We get an enormous amount of sunlight, And now the Albanese Labor government is converting that sunlight into gigawatts of energy that we can use in the digital era. So that's just step one, but a really important step. On top of that, the second element of the stack is digital infrastructure. That digital infrastructure and the data centers, and we've got lots of great Australian players in that space. NextDC, Firmus, Sharon AI, AirTrunk, of course, CDC, lots of Australian players who are really good at doing the work of converting those electrons into tokens. And again, that's a space where Australia is leading. We are the second largest attractor of global international data center investment last year, really punching above our weight. Another element in that stack is data. And Australia has fantastic data. We have a lot of creatives and publishers and artists who are producing that data. And my view is that data has never been more valuable than it is today in the explosion of AI. So our government has been very clear. Michelle Rowland has been very clear. We see value in that data. In fact, we see more value in that data in the AI world than we did in the pre-AI world. And that's why we're determined not to give it away. We don't want to weaken our copyright regime. We want to get the value of that data for Australia's creative and publishing sectors. Then we've got models, and there are plenty of examples of Australian models, and then we've got applications on top of that. So right through the stack, you can see, I think, a strong level of ambition for the Australian government.
And I'll urge our viewers to go and check out the space. You expand on all of those things. What we're talking about, is the competition in the global economy. It feels like a fairly traditional and orthodox idea when you think about how transformative artificial intelligence is going to be. So to come back to India last week, Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, speaking for the Global South, talked about democratizing artificial intelligence and AI as a global common good, which makes sense if you accept that AI is such an exceptional technology that it needs to be treated differently. I'm AGI pilled, to use a bit of industry terminology, so I'm inclined towards that. But I struggle to reconcile the two things of that, that sort of orthodoxy with the exceptionalism when we approach AI. What do you think of that? And what's Australia's role, I suppose, in potentially sort of bridging those two parallel positions?
Well, I think those positions have to be reconciled. We're a Labor government, so our values are about making sure that new technologies, the progress is shared right across every Australian. And we don't want to see a world where AI expands inequality, where the value is captured by foreigners or captured by only a few people in this country. We want to make sure that opportunity is spread broadly. To take the example of the Indian economy, I actually think, David, that they are a good example, even an inspiration in this space. What they have done with some of the previous waves of technology, the way they have given every single Indian access to a bank account, every single Indian access to digital ID, that has transformed the streets of that country. People who were small salespeople with stalls on the side of the road before trading in coins. Now those people have a bank account. They can have a savings account. Some of them can get a loan. They are now participants in the economy the way they were not just a decade ago. So India's example through DPI of using technology to empower every single citizen, I think, is the kind of inspiration that the world is looking for in AI. And I thought they got that message across really clearly in their summit last week.
It was an amazingly inclusive event. Certainly while I was queuing, the various times that I was queuing, I had people asking me for advice on their startups, and I had to confess I've never built a business before, so I'm really not your guy. But like I say, just the level of dynamism there was really impressive. I want to just talk, we're tight for time, but on employment and jobs. You've made the point, I think very well, that increased productivity doesn't automatically equal benefits to our people because, of course, rents accrue to capital and so forth. I want to put a strong version of that argument back to you. In fact, really the strongest version that there can be, and that is that it seems reckless to me to rule out that AI may be able to accomplish the vast majority of tasks that currently fulfill demands in the global economy, and in fact, likely future demands that will be created in the near term, unless we either deliberately intervene and carve out a role for people, or start to redefine what we regard as valuable human endeavor and how we reward it. I know it's getting a bit philosophical, but that's what I feel that's the kind of, I suppose, level of conversation I feel that we need to be having about AI. And all of that would be a properly historic shift if we start to sort of rethink about what constitutes valuable human activity. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think we should be complacent about the employment impacts of AI. I think clearly this is a technology which is very capable. It's very capable of doing knowledge-intensive tasks, and there are a lot of people in our country that are employed in doing those tasks. So the government is watching extremely closely the employment impacts of this technology. I think there are a range of different scenarios, and we're monitoring those scenarios. But let me say this: you said you think one of the options is that we reimagine what human work is. Well, I would say to you, David, that humans have been doing that decade in, decade out for hundreds of years. And AI is a technology which might be able to do a lot of the tasks in our jobs today. Mechanization was a technology that was able to do 99% of the tasks that humans were employed in agriculture 250 years ago. The machines that you and I are working on right now are doing a huge proportion of the tasks that employed a lot of people in offices 50 years ago. So humans are constantly reinventing what it means to have a job, what it means to add value to each other. My view is that we can continue to adapt, and humans will always find ways to deliver value to each other. And those things are jobs. 100 years ago, they couldn't envisage probably your job. Maybe they envisaged but didn't like my job. And we can't envisage all the jobs that will be around in 20 or 100 years from now. So this is a situation where the government has no complacency. There is certainly the significant possibility of labour market dislocation. To be fair, we're not seeing a huge amount of that right now in an economy-wide sense, but we are very alive to that possibility. But over the long term, I think our goal is simple. It's to enable humans to use these technologies to create good jobs where the prosperity generated by these technologies is widely shared.
I have a theory that if you can explain to a child what you do for a living, then it's a job worth doing. And I've found that as my career evolves, I'm less and less able to do that. So I'm failing my own pub test. Look, I know you have to go, but just one more quick one. I mean, just your overarching thought on, Delhi was the fourth global summit. We had Bletchley Park, Seoul, Paris, and now Delhi. It was, the annual opportunity to really kind of wrestle with the policy implications of this. And a lot's happened in the 12 months, or roughly 12 months since Paris. So, I mean, it feels to me as if the conversation is becoming more and more urgent. As I have said, I was a little underwhelmed about the way that governments are addressing the degree of policy innovation that's going to be needed. How do you feel about that? Are we being ambitious enough?
Look, to be honest, my view of Delhi was that it substantially validated the direction of the Albanese government, and that direction was set at the end of last year. And we said we have three objectives in AI. The first objective is to capture the economic opportunity. We have to do that. We have to make sure that we don't fall behind in the new AI economy. We don't want our nation to be poorer. The second objective was to make sure that that opportunity is spread broadly to all Australians and everybody benefits. And the third one is to keep us safe from harms. And I think that what I learned in Delhi was that those three objectives are the right objectives. I think Australia has a strong program to deliver on each of those. And that for me gives me confidence that we're heading in the right direction as a nation when it comes to AI.
Okay. Andrew Charlton, thanks for coming on the podcast, and good luck with what I consider to be the most important job in the government.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that.
And I am speaking today with Maxwell Scott. Max is co-founder and CTO of Strat Alliance Global, which helps companies and organizations integrate AI safely and lawfully. Max is a former US diplomat and has led teams at Microsoft's Office of Responsible AI, among other roles and hats. Max visited Australia recently and gained some insights into the AI landscape and debate here, which I'm keen to hear about. So, Max, thanks for coming on Stop the World.
Glad to be here.
So we're going to cover a number of issues around AI, both the upsides and the potential downsides. Let's start by talking about the economic impact. employment is an obvious first indicator. There are a number of studies and there's been data that's been analysed by various commentators and experts. I think one of the studies was titled "Canaries in the Coal Mine," which seems appropriate. Like it says, it's a potential sort of leading indicator for the economic impact. At the same time, a lot of AI experts are surprised, given the sort of benchmarks and the evaluations that frontier AI models are achieving, the sort of lack of uptake, or the degree to which the private sector and enterprises have been slow to actually take up AI, and I suppose the slow pace at which we've seen it rippling through the economy. I mean, given those sort of conflicting indicators, I suppose, what do you expect to see over, say, the next 2 to 3 years in terms of the economic uptake and the impact on productivity and these sorts of areas, assuming no major breakthroughs like a change that creates AGI? Let's just say that the technology continues to iterate at roughly the pace it's been going at.
Yeah, absolutely. So AI is obviously a fascinating technology that can affect wide groups of people, whether it be people from the most vulnerable populations to people who have the most sophisticated access to technology. But it's going to have a learning curve similar to what we've seen with other transformative technologies. The one that comes to mind for me in relation to what you're thinking about is social media. When social media came out, everyone was saying, "Oh, why would I ever use that? This is just a strange thing. I can just always call my friends, or I can text them," which was a new technology at that time. But now the same people who were saying to children, "Oh, you shouldn't use social media," the older generation, they are now the most prevalent generation to use social media. And I think we're going to go through a similar journey with AI, where it's going to reach a point of ubiquity, and it's going to be accessible and usable by most people. And that's going to be the point at which the real productivity gains are going to start to be realized, because people will go beyond just figuring out how to use it for basic applications like search or research or summarization or translation, and really be able to access the benefits of agentic forms of AI or uses of AI that go beyond just some of these more basic concepts, which people are only now becoming more familiar with.
Yeah. I notice, I know you're a responsible AI expert. I wish there had been more responsible social media experts in the early days of social media. We might be in a better place there. All right. So, okay, so it's poised. Well, at some point in the next, coming years, it will, I suppose that we will catch up with the technology in a sense, and we will start to use it more confidently, hopefully, and with the right regulations and these sorts of things. I mean, sticking with the economics for a moment, and particularly, I guess from the consumer point of view, the punters who are out there who are hearing about how it might replace certain skills in workplaces. A lot of people are worried about the future of work, the future of their children's work. That's been a big part of the debate here in Australia. Unions have demanded a seat at the table when it comes to how companies integrate AI, and that's something the government's had to have some fairly sort of tricky debates about. Where do you stand on this question of will it complement us? Will it enhance us? Will it make us more productive? Or will it replace us? Or, will it do a bit of both? But, do you think the economy and the average workplace can kind of manage that transition successfully?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I think it's going back to social media, which we just discussed a little bit. We're all kind of going through this experiment together, where we're going to learn and experience the outcome together, and it's yet to be determined exactly how that outcome is going to play out. However, I will say, as it relates to the replacement of the role of human beings and how they interact with their work and their day-to-day lives, I always think about the fact that there are two words that make up artificial intelligence. There's the intelligence word, and then there's the artificial word. And I think a lot of people index on the intelligence word because it's the more interesting aspect of what the technology does. And they might sort of misplace or forget the fact that it begins with the artificial aspect, because the technology and the inputs or the outputs of the technology are always artificial in nature. And whether it's generating something new or it's generating something that we've not seen before, it's never going to be the same as the way as a human being operates. It can only mimic intelligence. That's the artificial nature of it. So, and we're seeing, even if you generate AI generated art, if you've done that as a pastime, you'll see that there's just something that's not the same. And you can tell a piece of art, of AI art, very quickly, and in the difference between it and a normal person's art. And that sophistication is changing, and it's becoming more and more more difficult to tell the difference between the two. But the role of the human being in being able to critically think and being able to challenge and being able to create inputs that have value, that go beyond the artificial, is not something that I think this technology is going to be able to replace. It can be constructive in supplementing a person's intelligence by reducing mundane tasks and making people think in ways they've not thought before. But, I think a lot of the challenges and the issues that we're seeing in artificial intelligence are coming out of the fact that people are thinking that its intelligence is more than just artificial, when in reality, this is a technology that just mimics the reality of what a human being can produce.
That's interesting. Okay, so I'm going to push back a little bit on this. I wonder if that's going to remain the case for much longer. I mean, it's clearly the case with even the most advanced frontier models at the moment. They're brilliant until they're suddenly not, and when they're not, they do things that are they fail to do things that a 5-year-old could easily do, for instance. And yes, they work. We could get into the ins and outs of to what extent they are comparable to the process of human thinking, sort of neural networks and this sort of thing. But certainly they work on different sort of basic principles in terms of what they output. But I wonder if whether the mimicry thing actually whether that actually matters in the practical world, if the output eventually becomes comparable to human level thinking, like the pathway that they take to get there, does that actually matter? And do you not believe that the rate of progress, and let's say we take seriously some of the more bullish predictions that we're hearing from AI leaders, admittedly AI leaders who have a vested interest in talking up the near future prospects for their particular firms. I mean, let's say we do take those seriously. Are you not convinced that they might be able to match even, say, human critical thinking or human organizational thinking in, say, the next decade?
Yeah. So, I realize I might be an outlier on this, but I will say that, if you talk to an anesthesiologist, for example, an anesthesiologist is a person who's in the business of consciousness, and they will tell you that consciousness is a spectrum. And when a person is, you can't really answer the question. The question of whether a person is conscious or unconscious is actually a lot more complicated than one would think. Yeah. If you talk to a biologist about, intelligence, is a dog more intelligent than a cat? Is a whale more intelligent than a dolphin? Measuring these things is incredibly difficult, and actually defining a term like intelligence is very, very challenging. Sentience, which is the other term that's used to describe in the conversation about AI, is probably the least defined term, like when a being is sentient versus when a being isn't sentient. So when I see things like Microsoft's launched a team that's focused on super intelligence, or Google has a team that's focused on AGI, it's important to keep in mind that these are terms that are not well defined, even within the scientific disciplines that would define these terms. So if we're racing towards a future that's going to have things like quote unquote super intelligence or quote unquote AGI, then we ought to be able to define what those things are so that we can measure that we've achieved them. And so this is where I think it's difficult to say we're going to achieve these things that we are not able to yet measure. Now, back to your other question, will it actually be better than certain aspects of how a human performs? Can an AI system be better than a human at certain mathematical applications? Can it be better at create certain aspects of creativity, or can it be better at certain aspects of writing? Absolutely, I think so. But but to say it can be better than a human being at being intelligent, or that it is more sentient than another type of being, when we've not really defined those terms, is something that I think is a bit of a reach.
Okay.
And I think it's important to think about this technology in the context of where the science is. And again, reflecting back to what you commented on earlier about the fact that the people who are using these terms are also organizations that have a vested interest in saying that they're going to have this massive impact, and you need to follow along with them on this journey of promoting these technologies.
Yeah, okay. That's a really interesting take. I must say, most of the people, well, two observations. One is I own a cat, and I can tell you that dogs are definitely more intelligent than cats based on the performance of my cat. But most of the people I talk to, I suppose, are more AGI pilled, to use Silicon Valley jargon, than I think you seem to be. But so just to clarify, then, I mean, basically, your sort of medium term prediction is that humans will continue to have a useful function in the economy. You're not worried about our being replaced or rendered redundant in some way that is going to have to force us to make a complete kind of reorganization of the way we do our sort of political economics and society and economy and so forth.
I think I would probably, I don't know if I would go that far. I would say that, what we're seeing now and what's happening now is similar to the Industrial Revolution or similar to other types of technological revolutions that are going to change the way people relate to labor. What's different about what's happening now than what happened during the Industrial Revolution is that was focused on the blue collar worker and manual tasks. This is focused primarily on intellectual tasks. So what does it mean when intellectual tasks can be performed better by a certain type of machine? That's the question and the experiment that we're all a part of now. But what I think is not going to happen is that the role of the human being is going to be completely replaced. I think what's going to happen is that these technologies, being good at certain aspects of labor or intellectual endeavor, are going to push us to be more creative and to be more focused in new areas of intellectual endeavor that are going to create new forms of thinking and new ways of relating with work. And one example I will give is the interactions with AI systems that are happening right now and what are the skills that are most valuable. Skills like critical thinking and management abilities are going to become more valuable than they have ever been before. So the labor and the role of humans in relation to the labor is not going to go away. It's just going to change. People will become managers and they will become critical thinkers, and they will need to be able to differentiate between a human input and a non-human input and maximize the benefits of both.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think we're converging a little bit more here. I mean, I've heard people say, for instance, becoming a manager of a team of AI agents and having that as your sort of specialized skill, that's the sort of thing that we should be thinking about if we want to have some useful, some value. If we want to become attractive employees in the next decade or so, that's the sort of thing that we ought to be aiming at. One thing I do like, well, I suppose my hope is that we can actually harness this technology in a way that, it improves our economic productivity, leads us to a place of greater abundance, reduces the cost of everything, and makes, our lives and our well-being better. We improve healthcare, we improve manufacturing, we improve, we find solutions to energy. For instance, I was listening to Demis Hassabis, the CEO of Google DeepMind, speaking on this in the past week or so on a podcast about how they are partnering with, I think it's Commonwealth Fusion, one of the more promising fusion startups, and they're really hopeful that after decades and decades of fusion energy being talked about as the thing that is going to happen, and it hasn't quite happened yet, but they're now in a place where they really, really hope that this time it might happen. And the consequences of essentially free, clean, infinite energy, I mean, the transformative effect of that would be extraordinary. And I find all of these things to be enormously uplifting if we get it right. But I do also think at the same time that the adjustments to our to the way that we share the wealth, that we share the output of all of this increase in productivity is going to be a political challenge that I, for one, just, cynically casting my eye across the political landscape around the globe, particularly in developed democracies, I'm not super confident that that's going to happen. How do you switching a little bit, I suppose, to the politics of all this? How do you feel about our sort of collective ability over the next decade or two to transform the way we think about sort of the role of human beings, the value of human beings in the economy, and the way we respond as citizens, as voters, and these sorts of things, and what we expect from our elected officials to try and reorganize things so that we all gain the benefit? Sorry, this is turning into a very long question, but I mean, how do you feel? How optimistic are you about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that the benefit of AI in order to be able to contribute to scientific endeavors is one of the things that's the most exciting for me as well. Like, I think, there's obviously the question about fusion energy, but there's also questions about how you solve the science of climate change, or how you address complicated illnesses like cancer, or discover new drugs. There's so much potential for a system that can just think so quickly on these types of issues and run so many calculations that could create just enormous benefits for society. I think the thing that keeps me awake at night more than anything else is not, AI systems taking control, or AI systems being particularly harmful because they're being misused or abused. I think the thing that worries me the most is not even the people who are going to benefit from AI, but it's the people who are not going to be included in the benefits of AI. Because what we have is a technology that has this capacity to create all of this productivity and all of this opportunity, and we have almost 8 billion people on the planet, and not everybody is going to have access to it. And certain people will be able to leverage it in a way that superpowers them with agents, or with some of this drug discovery technology, you name it. And then there will be people in countries who are still struggling with access to connectivity, or access to basic digital literacy they would need to be able to leverage some of these skills. So now the conversation that we had about the internet, where the digital divide is going to become a problem, is now significantly amplified, because we have people who are operating with agentic capacities, and then we have people who are still struggling with the basic digital literacy. So that is the challenge, I think, that keeps me up the most at night. And I think that is the one that the issue of inclusion in the benefits of AI is, in my view, one of the bigger challenges for governments around the world. It's how do you make it so that this technology is not just one that Western democracies benefit from, and China benefits from, and maybe India benefits from, but it's also about Uruguay. It's about some of the most vulnerable populations. It's about my grandmother. It's not just about me. It's about the kids on the street. Like, that is sort of the bigger question, which I hope people will be able to. I hope many governments will continue to ask and continue to focus on, because that is where the real societal change is going to need to be had, in order to also share in the benefits of this technology as widely as possible.
And I suppose the global concentration of the production of this technology really you've got two, emerging. Mm-hmm. Well, you've got two AI superpowers. You've got Silicon Valley, and you've got southern China. This sort of Shenzhen, Guangzhou type region that are producing a huge portion. I guess France has got Mistral, Canada's got some game as well. But it is quite. I mean, South Korea, I suppose, is trying pretty hard. But you do have a sort of frightening concentration. At the risk of sort of caricaturing the point you were just making, I mean, do you worry about the emergence of this kind of global elite where, I don't know, but some minority of the global population lives to 200 and enjoys every gadget on that they could possibly get their hands on, while the other 90% odd I suppose continue in some state of privation.
Yeah, I mean, and what's interesting about AI and just sort of the mechanics of it, how it works, is it's, at the end of the day, it's only as good as the data that it's trained on. Regardless of what AI system is, it's only as good as the data that it's trained on. So if you make an AI system in California, and then you sell it, and it starts to be used in Cambodia, it will simply not work as well. because people speak Cambodian in Cambodia.
Yeah,
They look different than people from California. They use things different. They have a different culture. So when you hear from some of these AI leaders about how this technology is meant to empower the world, in order to get to that outcome, then you really need to ensure that you are engaging these vulnerable populations and including them in the development of the technology, whether that so that they're reflected in the data set that these technologies are being trained on, so that they can be more widely useful. And I do worry that, a lot of these technologies being developed in certain places are then being imposed on or being sold in places that are just vastly different from the way that reflect cultures and situations that are vastly different from the places and the data sets in which they were trained in. And that leads to just a lot of risk of harm, that these systems can potentially be misused or will falter and create a bunch of issues. So I think there's the idea of inclusive AI governance and the idea of engaging these populations in the development and deployment of these technologies. It's not just a moral imperative, it's actually also a business imperative, because it ends up making better systems if the goal is to make this technology for everyone. And so that's where, I think for many of these places that are thinking about how they win the AI race, if you will, or how they engage in this geopolitical conversation about AI, if you really want to win the AI race, you need to make the best AI systems. And you make the best AI systems by ensuring that they work for the most amount of people.
Interesting. Okay, so can you give me a few top of the head thoughts on, I guess what does the global governance architecture look like there, or even what commercial incentives can you actually build in so that an OpenAI or an Anthropic or whoever might want to do that? I suppose. There's lots of things to think about there, but perhaps just as an open question there, like what would you have to say about that?
Yeah, sure. So it's really heartening to see a lot of these efforts that are happening now on regional data commons, for example. So in ASEAN has this regional data commons. The South African government and the African Union is also working on this concept of a regional data commons. And what these are data sets that reflect Africa. They're data sets that reflect ASEAN. And these regional efforts of a bunch of countries that have similar cultures and want AI systems that better reflect them and their values to sort of come up with labeled data sets that can be trained and have systems that can actually work for their specific context are opportunities for companies like Anthropic and OpenAI and Microsoft to engage with those efforts and leverage their models, training them in ways that are more specific to those specific to those contexts, and ultimately just work better. I'll give you actually one example of one that Microsoft has done. Actually, Microsoft has a big contract that they've publicized with Korea Telecoms, where they have taken, I believe it was GPT-4, which is OpenAI's model, and they completely retrained it in Korean specifically. And they used different indicators from the Korean culture for Korea Telecoms to ensure that model wasn't just taking English, translating it to Korean, and then trying to, relate with Koreans. It was a Korean model reflecting Korean culture and Korean language in a way that could relate to that specific context. And these efforts are economically viable, or we see that they're economically viable in instances like that. And they lead to ultimately better performance, because that model, the Korea Telecoms model, had better performance as it relates to mitigating responsible AI harms than even OpenAI's standard GPT-4, which was translating from English to Korean and then back and trying to address all these different complicated cultural nuances.
Yeah, okay. So there's a job to do here for the countries outside of those superpowers. There are there are active sort of steps that they can take. Tell me if I've got my terminology wrong here, but basically we're talking about tokenization, like turning their valuable national data into something that is tokenized and can be used, for training or for building an AI model. Interesting. That you mentioned Microsoft. I had Mike Ye from Microsoft Asia on.
Oh, great! That's awesome.
A few weeks ago, and he was talking specifically about that. We were talking about what Southeast Asia can be doing, and companies as well as governments, and he specifically referred to, I mean, the most important thing is really just digitizing all of your valuable national or commercial data so that it is, it's useful fuel for an AI system. I mean, basically, if you can turn something into something that an AI model can use, and if you look around, if you look out your window, and I don't know, there might be, and now I'm really just sort of spitballing here, but you look at a tree out of your window and think about how much data there is about that tree. When it was planted, what kind of tree it is, what its sort of seasonal changes are, all these sorts of things. You could tell a lot about the history of your suburb, the climate, the air quality, all these sorts of things. If you can digitize and tokenize all of that, then you can actually put it to some really useful purpose for an AI system, which you can then turn into a benefit for your people or for your customers or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I mean, or really even just the rest of the world. I mean, I think the my view is that part of the beauty and part of the best parts of the world is comes out of the diversity that it has. And I would say, I had a lot of, obviously, you mentioned I had traveled to Australia recently, and in Australia I had lots of conversations about what Australia's role and opportunities might be in AI. And we had a ton of conversations about just the immense amount of data and information that Australians have as it relates to mining and extractive industries. Yep. Nowhere else in the world, no other government or place in the world has that significant amount of information and data going back to, decades and decades of how mining operations work and the specific ways in which you can extract these minerals, the best ways to do it. That data can be leveraged to train a model that could be applied anywhere else in the world and make it more sophisticated and more applicable. The other one that comes to mind thinking about Australia and the Indo-Pacific is kind of climate change too. Pacific Islands, that's another group of countries that I've spoken to, and they always are saying, well, what is our role in AI? And they have more climate change data in those Pacific Islands than they do anywhere else in the world. And that is, a huge opportunity to really, these are two opportunities that are there for specific governments who may not, and specific groups of people who may not think of themselves as AI leaders, but they have opportunities because of the diversity and the unique context that they provide to really lead on certain AI aspects.
That's really fascinating, and you're giving me a bit more assurance and confidence about the geopolitical opportunities and stability of all of this with what you're telling me here. Let's talk about the geopolitical balance and the race for a moment. Accepting everything that you've just mentioned about what the rest of the world outside the US and China can do, and the opportunities for Australia, Vanuatu, Fiji, whoever it might be, there is still a very sharp power competition going on between the US and China. The US under the Trump administration has clearly decided that race, that competition is absolutely fundamental, and removing all obstacles and barriers to that race are its number one priorities when it comes to AI policy. Let's just, I'll come back to the geopolitics, the race in a moment, but just on current US policy, what's your sort of snapshot view of the approach that the Trump administration is taking at the moment? And do you think that sort of competition mentality is the right one for the United States?
Yeah. So I think, I'll make a couple of comments on geopolitics, because I get to say a lot about geopolitics, but there's really kind of three core actors in my view, and as it relates to sort of the AI race and geopolitics. One is, of course, China, and China, they have this massive state subsidy arm where they can actually bankroll a lot of the AI innovation, and that's unrivaled anywhere else in the world. And part of their goal is to export as much of their technology as they can, and that comes with a lot of the same values that are held by the Chinese Communist Party. The other big player is obviously Europe, and what I'll say about the EU and Europe is they are excellent at regulating technology,
Yeah.
and they have been for years.
Experts.
Experts at this. And what's been interesting, the interesting challenge they have with AI is they have created this very sophisticated, very well thought through regulation in the EU AI Act, but the technology is moving so fast, it's very difficult for them to keep pace of it, because now they have this amazing ruling that was agreed upon between 20 countries, more than 20 countries, and everyone in the world is going to do it, and it's going to be like GDPR. But people are asking, well, what about critical thinking? What about sustainability? And now they're like, I didn't think about that. So,
Right.
So they're sort of struggling to keep pace with the technology as well. And then the third one is obviously the United States. And in the United States, we have a federal system, obviously, where we have states. And each state is regulating their own technology. And when it came to the conversation about privacy and many of these other issues, we tried to export that model saying, oh, we have a federated system, we have individual privacy regulations, but we don't have a specific nationwide privacy regulation. And we're running into the same challenge with AI, saying that, oh, our way to regulate AI is the way people should do it. But by the way we regulate AI is very unique and very specific to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the thought about, is competition and winning the competition on AI being vital to the U.S. I think, yes, that is an important national and economic strategic priority, and rightly should be. However, I think we face the challenge in trying to export our model when it's not something that is necessarily replicable by other nations. And much of what we have to offer, Silicon Valley, for example, many nations want to repeat that, and they want to have their own version of Silicon Valley, is also a thing that's not replicable because of the specific context in which that happened. So we face a lot of challenges in competing with a country like China, where their model is very clear. They can do these 100-year plans for how they want to do specific things. And competing with them is very challenging. But I'm glad to see that much of what motivates the reason why the U.S. wants to win, quote, the AI race is driven by the idea that we want to promote democratic values, and we want more people to have a say in this technology, and we want it to respect human rights, which are of course noble goals.
Yeah. Oh, look, and I agree, and I'm entirely sympathetic to that. I mean, being an Australian, and most Australian strategic thinkers will tell you that China is the number one strategic risk to Australia, and I, for one, certainly would not like the Chinese Communist Party's values to be exported in its in an AI form, in the form of AI models and AI products to the rest of our region, including to my own country. So in that sense, I'm right behind the United States in terms of that competition. I guess the question is around whether. The follow-on question to what you were just talking about is I suppose we want the regulatory systems. I mean, as you say, they're not replicable, but we want them to be complementary. Basically, I mean, that's my sort of that's my take, and I'm interested in your response to that. But given the approach that the United States is taking, which is that we want the US stack to be the one on which the world builds its own, local technologies and capabilities. Again, I'm fine with that in principle, but I guess I'm interested in your view on, say what it means for Australia that the US it has decided that a sort of a low regulatory approach and a sort of global export driven. Global domination for it's a terrible term, but for want of a better term, that's the approach that it's looking to take. I guess, how confident can I, as an Australian, be that we will be able to come up with regulations that suit us, that protect our own interests as Australian citizens, protect our safety, protect our privacy, all those other things that we ought to be thinking about from a regulatory point of view, plus that we are not purely customers to US products, but that we actually have a place in the global value chain as well. But complementary to what America is creating. Again, sorry, I'm jumbling up a few issues here into one question, but I'm just interested in, I suppose, how should I feel as an Australian about US policy and, how we might respond to it?
Yeah. So I think, historically, the U.S. position on technology policy, especially as it relates to how we should regulate technology overseas is, or at least at home, is don't regulate it. That's historically been the position. And we had an interesting kind of back and forth, I think, in the U.S. about, we're going to really regulate AI, and then now we're kind of back to, we're not going to regulate it, which is interesting. I think the AI is such a transformative technology and so impactful in so many different ways. Regulation is inevitable, and it will likely have to occur, whether we all end up adopting the EU AI Act or the European framework, which I think is probably what will happen. It's what happened during the privacy debates and what happened with GDPR. That just ended up being the framework. I think that's likely what will happen here. But every country will need to make their own decision, because every country has their own unique context and their own unique culture in which they want to approach a technology like AI in the same way they might approach a technology like social media. And one thing that has always interested me about Australia is Australia has always been, when there's something that the Australian government really feels strongly about, they are not afraid to be bold in regulating it.
Right. Yep.
And we could debate on the merits of the social media.
I was going to say, as the social media companies have recently realized to their chagrin. Yeah,
we could debate on the merits of that regulation, but I do think it's pretty fascinating that that is what we can't debate on. Is that as an example of the Australian government taking a stand on something they believe in as it relates to technology regulation. And I think it's heartening to see that governments can do that if they want to.
And it's very interesting that other countries have looked at that, and I mean they might have been already thinking about it themselves anyway, but certainly since our approach was announced and finally came into effect last week. Indonesia, Malaysia, Denmark, I forget the others, but a number of countries have come out quite strongly saying that they are either doing or planning to do the same thing. So that's people, you hear about the Brussels effect. Suddenly, no one ever expected to hear about the Canberra effect, but
exactly. But it happens. It's great.
But it does happen. I mean, so I'm just interested in what you said a moment ago, that you do actually think that sort of EU style approach will actually be picked up more globally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, U.S. businesses, for example, Europe is obviously a major market for them. In order to operate in Europe, they're going to need to follow the EU AI Act. If that is the most stringent act that they need to follow, which it likely will be, then that becomes the default global regulation. And I think that is what's likely to happen. I don't think the U.S. is going to come up with a more stringent regulation for artificial intelligence. And I'm not confident that other larger markets would come up with a regulation that would be even more stringent than that would really shape the sort of framing. So I think, if history is to tell us anything, with GDPR, there was a lot of fighting on the U.S. side about GDPR when that came out, but it ended up ultimately becoming the default regulation for how we think about privacy everywhere else in the world. I think that repeating itself is not something that's unlikely.
Yeah, interesting. I suppose I had assumed that some form of Trump pressure would. I mean, I don't know. I mean, well, obviously, Trump has a lot of leverage on the security front when it comes to dealing with Europe, and clearly he's happy to use that security leverage to force or to encourage or force economic changes as well. So I suppose I have assumed in some vague sort of a way that that'll start to have an effect on AI regulation, AI policy as well. I mean, I realise their act has been passed, and I'm not quite sure how they're going to undo that. But
well, it's really interesting, because when I was at the State Department, my focus was technology policy, and I did a lot of work with Europe, and I did a lot of work on the EU AI Act. And for as good as our relationship is with Europe on so many different issues and how we're able to shape different norms as it relates to all these different issues, on technology, they feel very strongly and they do what they want to do. And we really struggle to kind of shape that. That's been the historical story between the US and Europe on technology policy.
Yeah. Okay. Fascinating. All right. We do need to wrap up, but just I want to finish on Australia, and we've discussed how you visited here recently. I mean, I know it's always a little bit tricky to comment too frankly about a country that you visited recently, but I mean, I'm sort of inviting you to do so. So it's very much on me. But what was your impression of the level of the debate here? What did you sort of pick up while you were here? I must say, a lot of both expat and resident Australians who follow this area closely do feel as if our national discussion has been pretty slow, has been pretty unambitious. The government put a policy plan out, or sort of an action plan out recently, but it was widely regarded as being pretty light on in terms of substance and detail. What were your overall impressions? I mean, it's interesting. You've mentioned the opportunities with sort of mining data, for instance. Another one that gets talked about a lot here is building data centers as one way of placing ourselves in a global value chain. On the hardware front, if we do that, then we can become sort of essentially net exporters of intelligence. What were your impressions about sort of where we're at? Are we seizing the issue with enough confidence?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a great question. When I was there, it was interesting because a lot of the sort of conversations about Australia began with this idea that, we're so behind on AI. How are we going to catch up with the US or China? And what is our role in all of that? But what struck me the most is just the incredible amount of opportunity that Australia has. And I kind of see some of the innovation that's happening there, and it's really inspiring to me. I talked a little bit about the opportunity that the mining industry presents, but there are many other. There's space industry is another thing that's incredibly advanced there in Australia. And I look at the way that Australia is willing to take a leadership role on certain technology policy issues. And that sort of gives me pause in thinking that, Australia doesn't have a role in leading on many of these things. The other thing that really inspired me when I was there is some of the unicorns. I was able to go visit Canva, which what an amazing tool that is, just incredible. Atlassian's the other one. And I just think, I think Australians have more opportunity than they give themselves credit for as it relates to AI and AI innovation. I'm really excited to see kind of how the story unfolds.
So what do you see as our? I mean, just broadly speaking, I mean, we're not likely to come up with any kind of frontier model building enterprise as far as I can see at the moment. I mean, look, it's going to be very hard for anyone to sort of catch up with the giants at the moment, and I don't see Australia doing that. There are a couple of companies who are working on Australian large language models, but I mean, my absolute, all credit and power to them, and I hope they do well. But I think with the best will in the world, it's probably a long shot. There is there's the data center side on the sort of on the infrastructure, and then I think we have a highly educated citizenry. So building applications, things that actually harness AI, and whether that's Canva, Atlassian, enterprise software like Atlassian or graphic design type stuff that Canva does. There's a lot of things, but they're sort of, I guess, bookending either end of the value chain a little bit there. I mean, is that the way you sort of perceived it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's interesting to think about the types of technologies that get widely adopted. And I think a lot about robotics. If you think about cruise control, technically the cruise control, the way it operates in a car, that's actually a robot. It makes a decision and then it takes an action and it does a thing. That's technically a robot. But when you talk about robots and you think about robots, first thing you think about are those robots from Boston Dynamics that can do backflips. Sure. What does everybody have? Everybody has a robot that does cruise control in their car. And so when I think about AI innovation and the things that are most exciting, I don't necessarily think first and foremost about the frontier models. I think about the things that are going to see wide adoption and that are going to be most useful to the most amount of people. And I think about tools like Canva. I think about the way in which Australia can really sort of monopolize on the opportunities that they have in mining and some of the data that's available in climate change to create the best possible model for very specific functions that can solve specific problems and have huge impact. So that's kind of how I think about these things and how I think about it in the context of Australia. I think there's a lot of opportunity still to dominate in some of those spaces where Australia has always been good at dominating in. Yeah.
Right. Wonderful message to finish on. There aren't that many conversations I have that leave me feeling better, Max.
Oh, great.
As well as providing a different perspective. I do quite a bit of AI on this program, but possibly too much, and maybe at some point the audience feedback is going to be like, can you please talk about something else? But I love it, and you've provided a different perspective from some of the ones we've had before. So thank you for coming on Stop the World. It's been a great chat.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to that double episode, folks. We'll be back soon with another episode.